Perfuga. Cadon Ferrisborn opened his eyes and inhaled sharply, immediately regretting it. The air burned in his lungs, thick with the tang of rusted iron and decay. His mucranoid implant reacted instantly, filtering the toxins and converting the atmosphere into something barely breathable. His secondary heart thudded against his ribs, taking on the strain. He coughed violently, falling to his knees before his body adjusted and his breathing stabilized. Slowly, he became aware of his surroundings. Looking down, his gaze caught on something impossible. He had 2 hands again. For a moment, he flexed his fingers, marveling at the sensation. His body felt whole. But as he checked himself over, a disquieting thought crept in. This wasn't healing. This was not even replacement. His body had been reconstructed, pieced back together. The memory of the Neverborn speaking to him in the tiny escape pod flickered in his mind. He knew the voice, the one who told him to pick up his blade 5 millennia ago. He did not trust daemons. Such power they possessed, power he did not trust. He trusted iron and loyalty, men's will. The cramped escape pod was gone. Instead, he found himself in a confined metal box, the walls pressing in like a coffin. The only light his polder-mounted lumen meant only for emergencies. Panic surged. He pushed at the wall, which hissed open under his strength, and stumbled out onto the cold floor. Straightening, he glanced back at the storage locker. A joke, perhaps? The daemon had saved him from death, only to deposit him in a storage compartment. He retrieved his blade and rose unsteadily, his repaired leg unfamiliar beneath him, the gravity strange. The corridor stretched ahead of him in a long, curving arc. The inner wall was reinforced plasteel, the outer wall a streaked pane of glass teal. He crossed to the window, wiping away a layer of grime with his bare hand. Beyond, stars glimmered faintly, the black void broken by the looming mass of a gas giant. Its pale blue hue was unsettling, almost unnatural, with wisps of white clouds coiling like smoke. He stared at it, unrecognizing. Then he looked at the faded nameplate above the viewport, hollow crown. "This isn't a ship," he whispered to himself. "It's a space station?" The silence was oppressive. No hum of engines, no thrumming generators. The place was dead. He moved cautiously, his hand gripping the hilt of his blade. At the next bulkhead partially closed, he braced against the aperture and forced it open. Beyond lay a grisly scene. Bodies. Pirates by their ragged attire. No uniforms, just brigands scattered like discarded puppets. He examined them with distaste. Their flesh was dry and mummified, their weapons absent. The toxic atmosphere and lack of oxygen had prevented decay. He stepped back, repulsed, when a voice broke the silence. "Oh, there you are," it said lightly. Caden froze, his blade snapping up defensively. At the far end of the atrium stood a figure, unmistakably a daemon of Slaanesh. She was tall and slim, her form unnervingly graceful, her beauty unearthly and cruel. She raised a clawed finger and beckoned him with a predatory smile. He looked closer. Her mouth was edged with scars each side of her cheeks, like it had been slashed with a blade. He approached slowly, his eyes narrowed. "Thank you for saving my life," he said begrudgingly. Cenarion bowed theatrically, her movements exaggerated. "You are welcome, Sidon Ferrisborn of the 7th Company Iron Hands," she said. Her voice was a melody of mockery and allure. "I am Cenarion, the lady, voice of the maelstrom, mistress of whispers, dancer of the endless feast, the eternal lament, bearer of the forgotten name, and a few other titles no one remembers." Her tone trailed off, casual and dismissive, as if the litany bored even her. She looked around with a bemused expression. "Really, I need to get a herald or something to keep track of these things." Cadon didn't lower his blade. He followed as she drifted through the bulkhead behind her, her movements almost playful. His instincts screamed at him not to trust her. "What would you have of me?" he asked finally, his voice heavy with suspicion, coughing against the toxic atmosphere. Cenarion glanced back, tilting her head with a quizzical look. "What would I have of you? You're a Chaos Space Marine, aren't you? Don't you rebel, or raid, or fight the Imperium or something?" She plucked a flower from her hair, its petals unnaturally vibrant even in the dim light. Blowing on it, she sent the petals fluttering into the air. A fresh breeze stirred through the station, sweeping away the toxic staleness. The air smelled faintly of perfume. Cadon coughed, his body relaxing as his secondary heart stopped pounding. Spitting mucus from his mucranoid gland, he glared at her. I thought I had tasks to perform, fealty to prove. That's how this works, isn't it? Cenarion raised an eyebrow, her lips curling in a sly smile. Oh, sure, she said with feigned seriousness. Say Slanesh is better than the other 3 deities 3 times a day and twice before meals, and we'll call it a deal. Her tone was so utterly sincere that Kadon nearly laughed. His hand went to his head in confusion. You saved me, I assume for a purpose, and then what? You don't even demand an oath or sign of fidelity? Besides, he shrugged, my company is gone, crushed in a gas giant. What am I to serve with? A company of one with a sword? He thrave his daemon blade despondently. Cenarion paused, placing a clawed finger thoughtfully on her chin. The cuts on her cheeks rippled. Her glowing, predatory eyes narrowed as though she were truly pondering the question. You make a good point. Let's see. She looked around, then said, I will grant you 2 gifts, she said, her tone light yet filled with menace. First, a daemon weapon to accompany your demonic blade. Her clawed hand extended toward a corpse sprawled in the dust, its armor corroded and rusted with age. There, it's called the Songmaker, she smiled. Then her lips curled into a smile, her cheeks cracking the wound's opening, and she gestured elegantly toward the corridor behind her. Kadon turned his gaze to the long-dead warrior she had indicated, his skeletal remains slumped against the wall. In the corpse's withered hands rested a weapon, grotesque and unmistakably chaos-tainted. He approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the brittle remains of the dead. The weapon resembled a 2-handed heavy bolter, but its vile design betrayed its infernal origins. Its main body was an unholy fusion of blackened brass and pulsating veined flesh. The veins throbbed with an eerie rhythm, as though the weapon itself had a heartbeat. The barrels, shaped like the pipes of a grand organ, were intricately adorned with glowing, chaotic runes. The sigils shimmered faintly, their light shifting in time with the weapon's unnatural pulse. The air around the weapon felt heavy, charged with an unspoken power that made Kadon's skin prickle beneath his armor. He knelt, reaching for it. As his hands touched the weapon, the dry and desiccated grip shifted unnervingly. With a wet sound, it became slick, fleshy tendrils sprouting from its surface and coiling around his hands. He froze, momentarily panicked as the weapon bonded to him, forming an unsettling connection that sent an unnatural warmth coursing through his fingers. A faint hum emanated from the weapon, low and haunting. Its tones oscillated between a soothing, melancholic lullaby and a jarring, discordant dirge. It seemed alive, aware even. The daemon blade at his side responded to the presence of the new weapon. Its dark tones harmonized with the heavy bolter's hum, creating a chilling resonance that echoed in the silent corridor. Kadon's jaw tightened as he felt the feeling of the tentacles. He worried the weapon might have permanently affixed itself to his arms, its grotesque tendrils feeling as though they were sinking into his flesh. Yet as he drew back slightly, it released him. The fleshy grip retracted with a reluctant, organic squelch. He rose to his feet, holding the weapon aloft for a moment, inspecting its grotesque beauty. He could feel the power within it, a chaotic force that both thrilled and unnerved him. Without a word, he mag-locked the weapon to his power pack, the connection buzzing faintly as it settled into place. Thank you, he said finally, his voice low and cautious. He glanced at Cenarion, unsure if he had truly earned such a weapon or if it had been given for her own inscrutable purposes. Cenarion tilted her head, her smile growing. You are most welcome, Kadon Ferrisborn, she purred, her voice thick with veiled intent. Kadon looked down at the fallen warrior, his gaze lingering on the rusted, battered armor and the desiccated remains beneath. What happened here? He asked, his voice low. Cenarion turned her glowing eyes to the corpse, her expression unreadable. This station belonged to a pirate clade that operated within the Arcana Inclusium, she said, her tone carrying a faint note of melancholy. They were the first to face the wrath of the Navis Astra Wigathane. She smiled again. Oh, they were not all mine. They followed a daemon named Xylophus, an old acquaintance. Her face fell into genuine sadness. Now sadly gone, I am afraid. Just like his champion here, along with most of my own host. She seemed to collect herself. But I made the weapon you hold. It's a good one. She added, cheering slightly. The mention of the Navis Astra Wigathane stirred something within Kadon. He clenched his jaw, remembering the crushing defeat he had suffered at the hands of those same warriors. Then looked around at the ruined station. It was the epitome of his career. He sensed a strange kinship with the Neverborn. She seemed as defeated and broken as himself. They both stood together in awkward silence. Kadon broke it. "So, you want me to raid? Back to what I was doing before all my fellow Seventh fell?" He was still unsure on their relationship, or if he did have something to prove. Cenarion, who was holding her cheek, seemed to snap out of whatever could she was under. "I wanted revenge, Kadon Ferrisborn, and I moved too fast and without a true plan, and now all is ruin." She crossed, looking out of the viewport at the gas giant. "Now I have a long game to play, and an enemy more than ready for me, but I have realized my mistake." "And what was your mistake?" Kadon asked. Cenarion beamed Kadim, her face cracking once again. "I thought too small. I wanted a little planet, but I know that was too small." Her cheeks split wide as she smiled, long sharp teeth becoming visible under the cuts in her flesh. "I am going to take the entire Maelstrom Reach, and you are going to help me." Kadon looked at her hard. Then he knelt beside the fallen pirate, a fellow Astartes, placing a hand on the battered helm. The corpse's wounds were all to the front. He had faced his end as a warrior should, head-on without retreat. There was a kinship in that act, a faint echo of the Iron Hand's code. Cenarion continued, her voice almost wistful, now back to more immediate matters. "The Navis Astra Wigathane cleared this system, killing Xylophus followers. They never return to their conquests unless they can use them. They're like carrion birds, stripping what they need and leaving the bones behind." She gestured expansively to the station around them. "This place is yours now, my gift to you." Kadon hung his head, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Is that my second gift?" The demon chuckled, a low, melodic sound that echoed through the silent hall. "Oh no," she purred. "That's a bonus. Your second gift will be a ship." Kadon's head snapped up, disbelief flashing across his face. "A warship?" he asked, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across his features. Cenarion's grin widened, baring her long, pointed teeth, her cheeks splitting disconcerted him. "The most powerful ship in the Reach," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. She let out a light, teasing laugh. "But before you embark on your new path, I will require one thing of you." Kadon's stomach churned. Of course, this had all been a game, a series of incentives leading to the inevitable price. He stood, his posture rigid, his voice curt. "What do you want?" Cenarion turned to the glass wall, her reflection shimmering in the faint starlight. She raised a clawed hand, running it lightly across the surface as if caressing her image. "I want you to travel to Elfscathia," she said softly, her voice almost dreamy. Sidon's breath caught. He stared at her, wide-eyed. Elfscathia. The Dark Eldar pirate kingdom. The mere mention of it sent a chill through him. His own captain had refused to seek it out, even if they could have found it. The tales of its horrors were whispered among the most hardened of warriors. "I'll need more than a powerful ship," he said carefully. "I'll need a fleet, and even then, it must be found." Cenarion tilted her head slightly, still focused on her reflection. She ran her claws through her hair with an air of idle amusement. "Look in the life pods," she said lightly, her tone almost dismissive. "I always leave myself a fallback plan," she added. Kadon blinked in confusion, stepping forward. "You?" Before he could finish, she stepped through the glass as though it were liquid, her body vanishing into the reflection. He was alone again. The station felt colder, quieter, as if her presence had brought with it a life and energy that was now painfully absent. He clenched his fists, turning his gaze toward the shimmering gas giant beyond the glass teal window. He was alone again. He had never felt more alone, and he was supposed to help this Neverborn take over the entire Reach? One man? On a deserted station? And how was he going to get to Elfscathia? Even if he could find it? A cursed kingdom at the edge of nightmares. The ship, he remembered. Yes, she had said he had a ship, a powerful one, the most powerful in the Reach. The thought made his chest tighten with expectation. Surely it was docked here, on this derelict station. But the idea didn't make sense. The Navis Astra Wigathane would never have left something so valuable behind, unless the Neverborn had brought it here herself. The possibility filled him with cautious hope. He moved purposefully through the silent station, checking the docking ports, his boots echoing in the dead halls. At last, he reached a viewport overlooking the station's primary dock. His eyes scanned the gloom, seeking the shape of a warship. A mighty Chaos battlecruiser, a Drakari brigantine, perhaps even a dreadnought. He held his breath as he approached the glass. Then he saw it. Reading its nameplate, he thought it was quite apt. Perfuga. Caden's heart sank. His shoulders slumped, and he leaned forward, resting his head against the dirt-covered, armored glass of the viewport. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to suppress the urge to laugh at the cruel joke fate had played on him. The ship before him wasn't a battlecruiser. It wasn't a frigate or even a corvette. It wasn't anything resembling a warship. It was a barge, an actual barge, built for carrying ores and junk. A worn-out, ancient transport ship loomed in the dock, its hull battered and scarred with radiation burns. Plates of second-hand steel were haphazardly welded to its surface, the patchwork repairs glaringly obvious even at a distance. Its engines looked mismatched, as if scavenged from different vessels and bolted together by desperate hands. A handful of bolted-on turrets, likely salvaged from other ships, dotted the hull, little more than an afterthought for defense. Caden stared at it in silence, his thoughts bitter. This was his reward? This rusting, creaking junker? He had expected glory, a ship worthy of his aspirations. But a barge meant for hauling unprocessed ore? It was laughable. And yet, he couldn't even summon the energy to laugh. He straightened, his new hand running down the dirty glass teal, leaving a streak in the grime. He sighed, muttering under his breath. A scrap barge, Cenarion's words echoed mockingly in his mind. The most powerful ship in the Reach. His lips twisted into a grim smile. Of course. She was Neverborn, a creature of the warp. What she saw as a grand warship and what he saw as a rusting ore hauler were likely two very different things. What did a daemon care for mortal expectations? Perhaps to her this was a warship, its power hidden, its potential untapped. Or perhaps this was her idea of a joke. And what was with those cuts on her mouth? He shook his head. He turned from the viewport, shaking his head. His hand instinctively moved to the hilt of Songmaker at his side, the gun humming faintly, almost sympathetically. He tightened his grip. A barge, he muttered again, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. But a ship, even one as wretched as this, was still a ship. And with it he would find Elf Scathia, as Cenarion had commanded. He had no other choice. The smell of rust was getting worse again. Caden wrinkled his nose, realizing the false atmosphere Cenarion had conjured was beginning to fade. The air was growing thin, heavy with the metallic tang of decay. He grunted in frustration and made his way deeper into the bowels of the station. If the demon's temporary gift was running out, he'd need to find something permanent. He descended through the dim, dust-choked corridors, the flickering lumen strips casting long, jagged shadows. His boots echoed hollowly, and the stale air made his breathing heavier despite his post-human physiology. The toxic environment wasn't an immediate threat, but he could feel the strain on his implants with discomfort. The servitor bays were buried in the heart of the station, and when he finally found them, he was greeted by rows of pods clinging to life, their faint power signatures like dying embers in the dark. The pods were covered in grime and cobwebbed wiring, frost clinging to their exteriors. He studied them for a moment, piecing together the story. The Navis Astrowigathine had left them here, perhaps as a contingency in case they ever returned, or perhaps they hadn't cared enough to bother salvaging the servitors. Either way, the neglect was evident. His own pirate band would never have left such valuable resources behind. Then again, the NihtWyrthans were no starving marauders scrabbling for scraps at the edge of the galaxy. They had a forge world. They had built their own navy. He scowled, the thought bitter in his mind. He was no longer part of a grand fleet or a proud warband. He was a warband of one. Half the servitors were beyond saving, reduced to skeletons and dust, their systems irreparably corroded. But the others, to his surprise, still functioned. Their hibernation protocols had preserved them, barely, though their flickering optics and groaning limbs betrayed their deteriorated state. He activated them, ignoring the whirs and clicks of their stuttering machine spirits. He directed some to begin work on the station's failing air filtration system, while others were ordered to prepare the barge for launch. Their sluggish movements and sporadic malfunctions made him curse under his breath, but they were his only option. Descending further into the station, he eventually reached the navigation sphere. What he found there left him stunned. The barge's navigator was still alive, or, at least, preserved. The figure was encased in a block of cryo-ice, his twisted hand reaching to the deck for some reason. Frost glinted on his gaunt features, his robes frozen stiff, the cryogenic prison sealing him in a moment of apparent confusion. Kedon stared at the sight, his thoughts racing. A cryo-grenade, perhaps, had trapped him in this state, an improvised solution to some past emergency. This place was full of questions. How he had survived for so long defied logic. Yet, here he was, frozen in time, and somehow his body hadn't succumbed. It took hours of effort to thaw him out. Kedon hauled the block of ice to the station's automedicae bay, a decrepit but still functional relic of Mechanicus design. The thawing process was slow and tedious, with the servitors assisting in fits and starts as they shambled about on their unstable limbs. When the navigator finally emerged from the ice, he collapsed onto the medicae slab, his body frail and shaking. His skin was ashen, his breath labored, but his third eye glowed faintly, proof of his continuing link to the warp. At first, the man appeared completely insane. He babbled incoherently, his words a garbled mixture of low Gothic and strange, fragmented prayers to the god emperor. Yet as the hours passed, his mind seemed to recover, albeit slowly. When he finally managed to speak with some coherence, his first words startled Kedon. Praise you! The navigator croaked, his voice hoarse but filled with reverence. His watery eyes met Kedon's. You saved me. Kedon frowned, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to praise, certainly not from navigators, who typically carried themselves with aloof superiority. I needed you alive to get this ship moving, he said gruffly, trying to mask his discomfort. The navigator nodded weakly, his expression unreadable. Still, you saved me. Kedon turned away, his mind already focused on the next task. The navigator would live for now, and the servitors were working. The barge might yet fly again. But as he glanced back at the frail man with his glowing third eye, he couldn't shake the feeling that this rescue might come with unforeseen consequences. Kedon's day was already filled with unexpected revelations. But the next discovery left him reeling. A servitor drew his attention with a mechanical whir, gesturing with one rusted limb toward a blinking emergency locator lumen. The soft, rhythmic pulse of the light was unmistakable. It was the kind used in life pods. Yet the signal wasn't coming from the docks or the pods he'd seen earlier. It was coming from within the storage bays in the lower docking port. Cenarion's parting words came to mind. Curiosity gnawed at him. With the navigator reluctantly following behind, muttering about the station's hazards, Kedon made his way to the storage bays. The bulkhead doors were sealed tight, their edges corroded and frozen in place. It took considerable effort to force them open, his enhanced strength straining as the seals finally gave way with a metallic groan. The air inside was stagnant and bitterly cold, and Kedon quickly directed the servitors to restore basic heating and air supply. The icy chill began to fade as the systems groaned to life, and a faint mist curled along the floor as frost melted away. There, in the dim light of the storage bay, they found it, a shuttlecraft. The vessel bore the scars of battle, its hull pitted and dented, covered in streaks of hastily applied sealant foam. Its markings were faded, but it was clearly a survivor of the Navis Astra Wigathane raid. Kedon approached cautiously, his boots crunching against the frost-covered floor. The shuttle's outer hatch creaked as it opened, revealing a cramped interior. What he found inside stopped him in his tracks. 4 cryotubes were lined against the shuttle's wall, their surfaces covered in frost and grime. 2 tubes held ragged figures, their tattered robes and scarred faces marking them as cultists. The third, a woman in chapter surf armor with Void Space Navigator pips on her plate, clearly alive. The fourth and last contained an unmistakable figure, an Astartes, his crimson armor adorned with symbols of the word bearers. Kedon stood in silence for a moment, staring at the cryotubes. The navigator shuffled nervously behind him, his third eye glinting faintly as he muttered incoherently about fate and omens. Kedon's lips twisted into a frown. He had never had much time for word-bearers, even before the heresy, and in the 5 millennia since, he had avoided them entirely. Their zealotry and endless sermons grated against the cold, logical tenets of the Iron Hands. He could leave them here, seal the doors and let the cryo-systems fail, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the flicker of curiosity, or perhaps it was the demon's influence whispering at the edges of his mind. With a grunt, he waved to begin the process of reviving them. It took hours to thaw the tubes safely. The servitors worked methodically, their decaying limbs clicking and whirring as they followed his commands. Finally, the Astartes awoke. Steam hissed as the cryosystems released and the figure within stirred. The word-bearer emerged slowly, his crimson armor gleaming faintly in the dim light. His eyes burned with a zeal that was unsettling even to Caden. As he took stock of his surroundings, the other 3 began shifting in their pods. Dagvar and Moyle looked around with blurry eyes, and when spotting Kedon sitting watching the Cerators aiding them, they groveled like the pirate wells he was all too used to dealing with. But the chapter serf looked around, her hair frozen to her scalp. She brushed ice from her tattooed face and looked back at him, examining his armor with hard green eyes, and nodded to him. He was surprised. A chapter serf seldom maintained eye contact. This one seemed to care little of his presence, accepting him as an officer. For some reason it reminded him of the old days. The word-bearer took a deep breath, surveying the room before his gaze settled on Caden. A slow smile spread across his face. "Ah," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "An Iron Hand renegade, a firstborn no less. How unexpected." Caden folded his arms, his expression cold. "Who were you expecting?" The Astartes chuckled, the sound joyous. "Please, Lord, accept my gratitude. It was not meant to be taken falsely." He stepped out of the pod, his movements steady despite his long stasis. "During the raid, as the Navis Astra Wigathine descended upon us, I was visited by a Nerverborn." "Oh?" Caden's tone was depressed. "Yor have met Cinerion." "Who?" the word-bearer asked. "A daemon," said Caden dismissively, waving a hand for him to continue. "It's probably not important." The word-bearer nodded as he tended to the serf of the word-bearers. "The Neverborn spoke to me, warned me to hide, to sleep. She said I must survive and live to meet the great hero of Slaanesh." Caden scratched as his head, looking to the navigator, who shrugged. "Well, we don't have time to hang around waiting for this no-name hero to turn up, so you're recruited. Welcome to the 7th, he said, turning to head back to see how the Perfuga repairs were going. He stopped himself as he thought of something and glanced back. "Just a stab in the dark, but I don't suppose either of you two know where Elfscathia is?" Sorny sat up, brushing ice from her armor, looked up in surprise. "I have made cargo runs there." "Why?" she asked. Caden smiled. He had a feeling that Cinerion was very good at planning ahead, and he wondered what she had in store for him. He had started out with himself and a sword, now he had a ship and a crew.